Welcome back. My name is Brandon Rowe, and I'm a professor at Utah Valley University. Did you know that there is a cave in Israel with an ancient inscription that says, "Jesus is here"? Well, today I'm going to be sharing a presentation that was given at the 2025 Utah Academy of Sciences, Arts, and Letters Conference on March 22nd, 2025. This is a slightly expanded version of this talk, but we're going to look specifically at how can we decipher this inscription in the Jesus is Here cave. We're going to look at early Christian worship, sacred space, and hierophany at a place called Horvat Beit Loya. Let's dive in. Horvat Beit Loya is an archaeological site in Israel's Judean lowlands, roughly 17 miles southwest of Jerusalem. It preserves the remains spanning the Hellenistic all the way to the Mamluk periods. From around 400 CE, the region was organized into 3 Roman provinces with ecclesiastical territories governing them. The provincial affiliation at Horvat Beit Loya would have been Palestina Prima, and its ecclesiastical territory would have fallen under the bishopric of Eleutheropolis. Now, Beit Loya had a significant Christian settlement. It featured a large church complex, a burial chamber, an oil and wine press, as well as subterranean structures such as columbaria, cisterns, and a chapel. But among this one of its most intriguing features is a Hellenistic period rock-hewn cistern from the 2nd to the 1st century BCE that was later repurposed during the Byzantine era and is known as the Jesus is Here cave. The site was discovered in 2005. Now, one approaches the cave from the east and descends past an ancient fig tree. A flight of stairs curves along the north wall until one reaches the round cistern roughly 16.5 feet in diameter. Now, once you descend to the bottom of this cave, there is a Greek inscription on the west wall. It reads, "Iousos ode," meaning Jesus is here, or Jesus is present. There is also an engraved cross-like symbol below the inscription and a depiction of a boat with a human figure above. The cave likely functioned as a sacred Christian space during the late Roman and Byzantine periods. This raises several key questions. Was it ever used as a baptistry? Perhaps a hermitage, or a site of liturgical worship? How does it reflect early Christian notions of sacred space, and what does the inscription mean? Was Jesus believed to have appeared here, or was he just spiritually present? Using archaeological and epigraphic evidence with theories of sacred space, I'm going to explore how this cave was transformed from a water cistern into a sacred Christian site. Now, early Christians often worshipped in hidden spaces, from house churches to cisterns and even catacombs, before constructing formal churches. Caves, grottos, in particular, were associated sometimes with divine manifestations, secretive worship, asceticism, and early monasticism. In addition to the Jesus is Here cave at Beit Loya, there are subterranean installations indicating various forms of Christian presence on the site. These range from columbaria, cisterns, a chapel, and a burial chamber. Now, some of the key archaeological features of this cave include the Greek inscription, "Jesus is here." It suggests a divine presence or a theophany. There's also a Latin cross before this inscription, marking it as a Christian space. There's a boat carving depicting a human figure, possibly Jesus, symbolizing some miracle or preaching event. Below that, we find a symbol, a Christogram, with possible connections to sacred names, crucifixion, and possibly a Greek acrostic word puzzle for fish. There's also soot-stained recesses and lamp niches as remnants of some kind of ritual proceedings or dwelling. And lastly, the southern wall has a particular alignment to the sunrise at the winter solstice and possibly at Christmas. So let's explore this. Let's begin by interpreting the meaning of the inscription itself. Now, if we look at the inscription, this is the area that we're going to pay attention to first. Now, looking at the textual and epigraphic evidence, we find the spelling of Jesus with epsilon for eta. This allows possibly an early date to the 2nd to the 3rd or 3rd century CE. Now, the second word, ode, on the other hand, has two possible translations. It could be Jesus here or Jesus present. Now, whether it's Jesus is here or Jesus was here, that depends on how we could look at that. But Jesus here would be this literal spatial claim, which was brought forward by the team of archaeologists. Now, another scholar suggests that ode, because it's referring to a person, would be Jesus present. And this could be a theological affirmation of divine presence. Now, something else that's really interesting here, if you notice in the images on the upper right, these are from the Beit Loya church as well as a nearby tomb for Salome. And in each of these, when it's referring to the name Jesus, it is using an abbreviation. We call this nomina sacra. It suggests, because there is none of this on our inscription, it suggests possibly an early date from the 3rd even to the 6th century. Now, the letter forms themselves, such as a simplified iota and the lunate sigma, the C-shaped, this suggests it could be related to the 1st to 3rd century, but also more of a later date to the 7th to 8th century. Now, what is the theological meaning of this? Well, for one, it could be a commemoration of a theophany. A theophany is when God manifests himself, and it is a sacred event. So perhaps early Christians believed Jesus had miraculously appeared at this spot. Similar inscriptions in Judea mark sites of divine encounters. In fact, very nearby at Beit Loya, we have another cave called the Jerusalem Cave, and there's an inscription on the wall that says, "I am Yahweh, thy God," as if there was some divine encounter. So there is this possibility of having divine encounters both in the region and specifically at this site. Now, the other possibility or theological meaning could be this ritual declaration. The phrase could have been used during baptisms or the Eucharist, and specifically in Christian liturgy, Jesus' presence is often proclaimed in the sacraments themselves. Now, the last possibility is this could be a protective inscription, as has been proposed by several scholars. This is similar to Byzantine-era home inscriptions. It could have this apotropic protective functions, if you will. So let's take a look a little bit more closely at the Christian iconography in the cave. So specifically, we're going to look at these three items. But let's begin with the boat and the person above the inscription. Now, with the interpretation, here I've got several illustrations of early Christian and other examples in the region and elsewhere. But this boat and person, number 1, is what is on the Jesus is Here cave. This possible identification could be Jesus preaching or Jesus calming the storm. The ship itself, we know that this was a symbol of the cross and a symbol of the church in early Christianity. There's also parallels with other early Christian depictions of boats and fishermen, apostles, and others. And in fact, there's also an interesting connection with several early Christian baptistries at Dura Europos, at Naples, at the Orthodox Church at Ravenna, that all connect Jesus walking on water, stilling a storm, and the miraculous catch of fish directly to baptism. Now, if we looked at the cross that was used and it precedes the inscription, this is interesting because it is very common, right? It signals that, first off, this is not just any person named Jesus, but this is Christ crucified and resurrected. Now, the use of the Latin cross instead of a Greek cross is similar to other inscribed examples at Beit Loya. So there on the lower left, you can see all of the different cross types that are found in the burial chamber, in the cisterns, columbarium, the subterranean chapel, etc. And so this was a common cross type. Now, the other thing is that we find at the Byzantine church complex that came later, most likely, is that crosses do precede inscriptions. These are commonly found in Byzantine Christian epigraphy. Now, the symbol below the inscription, this is one of the mysteries. Now, one group of scholars has suggested that this is possibly a chi-rho or an iota chi, and we'll talk about both. But if we're looking at this symbol, the images on the left, that is our symbol at the Jesus is Here cave. And chi-rho is the first 2 Greek letters for Christos, right, or XP. And so it means Messiah or Christ, and it's superimposing an X and a P or rho on top of each other. And so we can definitely see that possibility if we're looking at the symbol, but it is missing that horizontal line. We do find this symbol on a lot of coins, altars, funeral inscriptions, sarcophagi, and church mosaics, typically dating to the 4th century and after. And here's an example in the middle of a 4th century coin of Crispus, which was the son of Constantine, with a chi-rho on his shield. They believe that this symbol was popularized by the Roman Emperor Constantine, specifically through his biographer Eusebius. Now, we also have an inscription at Beit Loya in the cruciform columbarium, which has been translated as charo or caro, and it is consisted of a chi, an alpha, a rho, and an omega. Now, this is quite possible that this is what we call a cryptographic transposition, where you're creating a word puzzle with a cryptic message. So we can see this very easily, that very nearby we have this inscription on the columbarium wall, only a couple hundred feet from the Jesus is Here cave, with the XP or chi-rho for Christ, and then Alpha and Omega. Now, the other possibility that some of the scholars have suggested is this could be, the monogram for iota chi. But if you're looking at the image there on the left, That would essentially be the Greek letter of each name for Jesus and Christ. Iota, or the I, for Jesus, and Chi, the X, for Christ. Now, when these are combined, a lot of times it appears as a six-pointed star. We can see this used in a number of locations in the 4th century marble chancel rails at the Episcopal Basilica of Stobi in North Macedonia, to the 6th century mosaics with an iota chi on the ceiling of the Archbishop Chapel at the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna. But very nearby, the Martyrium Cave Chapel chamber that was dedicated to Saint Salome at Horvat Beit also has this six-pointed star inscribed within a circle. So this definitely is a possibility for our site. But once again, we are missing that horizontal band for the symbol. Now, another possibility is a staurogram, or the tau rho symbol. This combines the Greek letters tau, the T, and rho, the P, to resemble a cross. In fact, this was used in early Christian manuscripts dating to the 2nd to the 3rd centuries as a sort of pictogram for the Greek words crucify, stauro, or cross, stauros. Now, this was used on tombstones, inscriptions, baptistries, chancel screens, pottery, mosaics, liturgical objects, rings, terracotta lamps, etc. You can see a number of these examples. Now, it should be noted that the one on the upper right corner, that in particular is actually an inscription that was found at Salome's tomb. So we do have the use of the staurogram or the tau rho very nearby. One of the interpretations that there was a similar feature there, that image on the top row in the middle. This features this cross, but there's an inscription that says Christus, which means Jesus is here. This was used on a dwelling and I believe also a tombstone, which is kind of interesting. I think the other thing that's interesting here is that this symbol, the tau rho, was also used on a number of early Christian baptistries from the 4th century in Naples, Italy. We also find that in the 6th century baptistry of Kaliba in North Africa. And lastly, looking at the bottom row, that piece of pottery shard was actually found at Beit Loya. It's dated from the late Roman period, and it shows a cross. It very well likely was a tau rho, similar to these other examples of stamps that were commonly used with alpha and omega as well. So, this could have been a possibility, but once again, we are missing several of the lines, the X in particular, the chi symbol, which, looking at the cross, it could have come later. So it could have been some part of the inscription that was the engraving that was at a later point or later date to basically complete the symbol. But one other fascinating possibility is a Christogram, such as the chi rho tau symbol or the ichthus. This combines multiple monograms, abbreviations. It appears as an 8-pointed star, a double cross, or a 8-spoked wheel. This was used on early Christian gems, on chancel screens, on columns, door lintels, tombstones, etc., dating all the way to the 2nd century through the 6th century. And so there's a lot of possibility here in particular. So we could view this in a number of ways, but with all these examples, we can see, how this could easily have become the symbol. What's interesting, though, is specifically on the lower row, number K, the image in K. This also comes from Salome's tomb, and we'll talk a little bit more about that 8-pointed star symbol. But in the letter I image, we also have this example that this symbol was used at early Christian baptism, specifically a baptismal seal from the Bruce Codex in the books of Jude, and this specifically was a sign for the baptism of the Holy Spirit. So once again, we do have a possible connection with baptism. We also have the ichthys, which we'll discuss in just a moment. Specifically in the top row on the left, letter A, we have this 4th century alabaster fragment from Rome, which features the Chi-Rho Tau symbol as well as the ichthys inscribed beneath, directly connecting the Greek word for fish with this symbol. So let's look a little bit at this symbol, right? Is this a Christogram? Is this a wheel? Is this a monogram? So a lot of times the early Christians, they would use these abbreviations for sacred names. So the top row there, iota chi theta for Jesus Christ God, or iota chi theta upsilon, Jesus Christ God's Son, and then the most important one that becomes, the abbreviation for the Greek word for fish, iota chi theta upsilon sigma, Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. So if we look at this, with this 8-pointed or 8-spoked wheel, right, or this double cross symbol, we can actually find all of those letters, those Greek letters, inscribed within this symbol. So the question then becomes, is this present at the Jesus is Here cave? Is this acrostic word puzzle present? Well, if we start laying it out, we could definitely see how the first, Jesus Christ God, is present there, or Jesus Christ God's Son, but also Jesus Christ God's Son, Savior, iota chi theta upsilon sigma. I think that's important to recognize because as we'll see in this slide, that this was actually a common symbol that was used only a couple miles away from our site. This is in Salome's chapel at the tomb of Horvat Kasra, where we have not just the 8-pointed spoked wheel that is accompanied by an inscription, specifically sigma theta chi for Savior God Christ. And notice that the chi symbol, the X, has a line above it, meaning it is a sacred name. And so if we looked and compared that to the Jesus is Here cave and used that same symbol, we could find that possibility. But that this was also used very close to the site does suggest that this meaning could have continued. So what about the astronomical alignments? Well, previous research that was performed last year, we identified that the church complex with all the beautiful mosaic floors was actually oriented to the sunrise on the feast day of St. James on April 30th. So it was also very close to the mirror bearers, which included Salome, the tomb we've just been talking about. So why was this significant, right? The mosaic floors were depicting these fishermen apostles, either Simon Peter or Andrew, and James and John. But the fact that it was aligned to St. James Day is significant. So, using archaeoastronomy methods, we investigated the Jesus is Here cave in a similar fashion that we did with the church complex itself. So, looking at the walls themselves and their alignments of both the north and the south entry walls, we found that the southern wall in particular was aligned to the sunrise on the winter solstice. That was a significant find. Now, further investigation needs to explore this, but we know that a number of major religious feasts that were celebrated in the 6th century included these 4 solar points of the year, the solstices and the equinox, and that these were tied to sacred events. So, for instance, the spring equinox was connected with the conception of Jesus, as well as his death and Easter, right? But we also find that its equivalent, the fall equinox, was associated with the conception of John the Baptist, whereas the summer solstice was associated with John the Baptist's birth, and then the winter solstice was associated with Christmas or Jesus' birth. Granted, this was in the 6th century, but we also know, in particularly, that the Jesus is Here cave is aligned to not just the winter solstice, right, on December 19th, but it also was connected with the major religious feast of Christmas that commemorated Jesus' birth. This happens to align around 30 minutes after sunrise on Christmas Day. It's all the way spanning from the years 100 CE all the way through 500 CE. That sunlight would have potentially entered into the Jesus is Here cave from our preliminary analysis. Now, looking at the walls, we need to do a simulation on this, but it does appear that sunlight could have entered the cave and even illuminated that cross that preceded the inscription itself. So a very interesting find. And we know that Jesus' birth was commemorated and celebrated as early as 379 CE. But we do have further questions, right, that need to be studied. So the first question is, when the cistern was created in the 2nd to 1st century BCE, was this solar alignment intentional, right? Was the entrance later modified, or was the entrance different? That remains for further excavation and exploration, as the cave has actually not fully been excavated yet. So we then ask the question, could a winter solstice alignment have been used by early Christians in this space, even if it was by happenstance, to commemorate Christmas, Jesus' birth? Or did this alignment work to commemorate other local feast days? In fact, as early as the late 300s or the late 4th century, we know that several feast days that were celebrated specifically on December 26th and 27th were the feasts of Stephen, the first martyr, Peter, James, and John. And this is documented by Gregory of Nyssa. So, this could have been, once again, another possibility, this connection to the apostle James the Great, not James the other that was viewed as the brother of Jesus, and one of the other disciples. So, there's a lot of possibilities here. Further analysis is needed to see if any of these connections work. So, as we get to try to conclude this study, in light of this information, what was the cave's function? The first proposition is that the cave was viewed as a baptistry. It definitely, could have been this for a number of reasons. The first is that the use of any underground cisterns grottos or caves, even catacombs were used for Christian initiation rites. In fact, we have pre-Constantine grottos and basins in Nazareth that were likely used for baptism. We also have a baptismal font, although rare, that was found in the catacomb of San Ponziano in Rome. We also have the potential of influence of the Jewish ritual baths or the mikveh and early Christian baptismal practices, because on the site at Beit Loya, we do in fact have a mikveh that was ceremonially used by Jews, that was in particularly connected to an olive press for making sacred oil, and for ritual purity and things like that. So, we do have this, only a couple 100 feet away, an example of a subterranean structure. But this was a cistern, and if this cave held standing water, it definitely could have been used for immersion baptisms, similar to nearby the Jewish ritual bath that we were just talking about. We've already looked at the inscription, that it could align with baptismal theology, affirming Christ's presence during these kind of initiation rites. We see that the Christogram, the symbols connection to the Greek word ichthys, Greek for fish, that is another possibility. We see that Jesus, the depiction of a person on a boat, Jesus could also be viewed as the fisher of men on this ship of salvation. The circular cistern itself could have been viewed as a womb for rebirth through baptism. Once again, the solar alignment to winter solstice and Christmas, if baptisms were performed at that time, could have been this time for rebirth, just as Christ was born into the world. Now, the early Christian rites of baptism also involved very specific procedures. In fact, from Cyril of Jerusalem, we know that at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you would enter into the baptismal chamber, you would actually face west, the area of darkness, you would renounce Satan, which would have been, for us, entering into the cave facing west, going into the dark abyss of the cave, encountering the inscription, and then turning to the east and being baptized 3 times, 3 immersions for the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then you would be leaving facing the east, the region of life, the region for rebirth. So, there is some interesting parallels that could have been connected here. And even if the other subterranean chapel, if this space predated that, there is the cruciform columbarium that's just northwest of the site, only 230 feet. This could have been used for early Christian gatherings. It is a Greek cross in form, not necessarily suggesting that it was originally designed that way, because I believe it is older than that. But this is the space that also has that word puzzle for Chi Rho and Alpha Omega. So, and with also another cross on the wall. So this space could have been used for these early Christian gatherings prior to the baptismal service. So there is a lot of possibilities there. Now, the other proposition that some scholars have proposed is that the cave very likely served as a hermitage, a dwelling place for a monk or a holy person. And so these caves were very common in the region, and we do have lots of evidence of monks living in caves near Christian settlements. So the fact that this Jesus is Here cave is not immediately around the settlement area could be this possibility. The inscription could also be a personal devotional statement, like maybe there was a holy person and they had a sacred experience, a hierophany, or even a theophany, where the sacred manifested itself, and so they decided to inscribe Jesus is here, or Jesus is present, affirming this important truth. Now, the other possibility is that we do have lamp niches, there's soot marks, there was pottery that was found, dated anywhere from the 6th all the way to the 8th century, by some of the archaeologists, would suggest a much later dating for this space. But it also could have been used earlier and changed over time. I think that's something that's important. But we do have evidence of Christian aesthetic practices in caves. In fact, this image here in the middle is a plan and a section of the venerated grotto at Bethany. Another sacred space. We also have the notion of Saint Jerome dwelling in a cave, etc. Now, the last possibility is that the cave could have been also been used for liturgical worship for groups of early Christians. This definitely could have been a possibility. It could have hosted these small gatherings for Eucharistic services before the construction of the larger Byzantine church complex around the year 500. We also have the Beit Loya subterranean chapel, this image here in the middle, which was discovered in the late 19th century. So all these are possibilities, but that subterranean chapel did date to the year around 400. So could the Jesus is Here cave been used earlier than that? Very likely, especially considering some of the dating that we were looking at for the symbol, the inscription, other possibilities. But we also find that the boat carving could have had this reference to Jesus' miracles on the water, reinforcing themes of faith, divine presence. The entrance at the east actually would have allowed for liturgical prayer towards the east, towards the open sky, to the sunrise, to the sun, representing the Son of God. So, that's also a possibility. The other thing that could indicate that this space could have been used for early Christian gatherings is the alignment with the winter solstice and Christmas and some of those other feast days, right? So this could have resulted in choreographed astral architectural ritual events that were not uncommon to basically have the sun rise on a particular day, especially like Easter and others, and enter into the church. So all of these are possibilities, and this image here on the right does show this possibility of divine service that was held in some of the catacombs of Saint Calixtus around 50 CE. So, in conclusion, then, one of the things that is really important is that we recognize that this utilitarian space was transformed into a sacred space. This profane space became sacred. The inscriptions also served as this declaration of faith. This could have been personal, communal, liturgical. Beit Loya also represents a broader sacred landscape where a number of inscriptions, symbols, ritual practices were shaping early Christian worship in this community. And the cave itself does express this concept of hierophany, which is when the divine manifests itself, or the sacred manifests itself, whether an angel appears or there's an outpouring of the Spirit, but the fact that it says Jesus is here, this speaks of divine presence. Now, there's a lot of future research that needs to be performed. For instance, the cave has not been fully excavated, surprisingly. So, could further excavations confirm its use as a baptistry or a hermitage or other things? And how does this compare to similar Christian cave sites in the Judean foothills? Now, this project would not have been possible without the help and support of many, many people listed here. So I really, from the sincere bottom of my heart, I wish to thank all of them. And so I'll leave you with this closing statement. And consider this. Even in a remote cave in the darkness of the Judean hills, someone carved a simple but profound truth. Jesus is here. Join us next time for more lectures and content. Please subscribe and hope to have you on our channel again. Thank you so much.